Lamplight Whispers, journeying with you through the river of time.
Tonight, let us travel back to the frozen ramparts of the Qin dynasty, where the howling winds hold the secret of a woman's tears that could bring stone walls to their knees.
It's late at night. The lamp flickers low, and all is quiet outside. Tonight, listen to a story from long ago. Just lie back and listen. Tuck in your blanket and let the Great Wall slowly appear out of the dark. The Great Wall is the longest wall in the world. It winds for thousands of miles, over high mountains and across barren lands. Even today, it rests along the mountain ridges. When you stand at its base, you have to look way up. But beneath those stones and dirt, many bones are buried. When the workers died, they were often buried right nearby. Tonight's story is about a builder's wife. Carrying a warm winter coat, she walked thousands of miles. Her name was Meng Jiangnu. Back then, she didn't know the coat by her bed would never reach its owner. This story begins after the 6 kingdoms were unified. The main roads grew wider, with soldiers and horses passing day and night. The Emperor of Qin wanted to build a great wall to keep out the northern tribes and protect his new empire. Orders came down to every village. Every family had to send a man, and if anyone was missing, people were punished. The officers knocked on door after door. At the sound of wooden doors rattling, chickens fluttered across the yard, and boiling water was left unattended on the stove. The village had just celebrated a wedding. Red paper still hung on the door, and the smell of wine lingered around the table. The groom was Fan Shiliang. He was a quiet man, and on their wedding night, he simply straightened the hairpin in his bride's hair. They had been married for only 3 days. The red lanterns in the courtyard hadn't even lost their color to the wind. On the 3rd morning, several officers arrived at the gate. Mud clung to their boots, and heavy ropes hung from their waists. They unrolled the conscription order and read the words aloud. As soon as they finished, they led him away. At the doorway, he looked back at his wife. His lips moved, but no words came out. Then he stepped onto the main road. His silhouette grew smaller and smaller until a dirt hill blocked him from view. Meng Jiangnu stood in the courtyard. She didn't chase after him, but just watched the bend in the road fall empty again. The wind fluttered the red paper on the door. Corner by corner, it tapped again and again against the old wooden frame. From that day on, she began to wait. Every evening, she'd listen for footsteps outside the door. A month passed, then 2. Soon half a year, and then a whole year went by. There were no letters, no messages. The north was too far, and even passing merchants couldn't say what was happening there. Back then, official couriers only carried government mail. Once regular people were taken away, their families rarely knew if they were alive or dead. In spring, she worked the fields, planting rice. In summer, she sat by the window spinning cloth, white thread wrapped around her fingers. In autumn, she stored away the harvest. In winter, she chopped vegetables, salted them, and pressed them down under a heavy stone. She rarely cried in front of others. Her daytime chores went on one after another, and when her hands finally stopped, night had fallen. By the second winter, icicles hung from the eaves. The night wind crept through the window cracks, making the candle flame tremble. She knew the north was even colder. Snow would cover the mountain paths, and the wind on your face felt like tiny blades. She looked at the old coat her husband had left behind. The cuffs were faded, and the collar had worn soft. Late that night, she brought out some cotton and thick cloth. Sitting under the lamp, she started sewing a padded coat. The needle pulled through the fabric, catching the lamp's soft glow. The room was quiet, save for the gentle rustle of cloth. She remembered how broad his shoulders were, so she made them a bit wider and left the sleeves a little longer. The back of his neck caught cold easily. She raised the collar, checked it, and added another layer of soft cotton. Every stitch was careful and neat. She tucked all the thread ends inside, leaving the outside smooth and clean. By the time the coat was finished, snow was falling outside. She folded it up and wrapped it tight in a blue cloth. The neat bundle sat at the head of her bed. She watched it through the night and locked her door the next morning. It was thousands of miles from her hometown in the south to the Great Wall up north. She had no horse, only her own 2 feet. She set out with the bundle on her back. The main roads were wide and dusty, while the narrow mountain paths scraped against her shoes. When she grew thirsty, she'd ask folks along the road for water. They never asked questions, just handed her a simple bowl. When a cart came along going her way, she'd walk with it for a stretch, and late at night, she'd shelter under someone's roof to escape the cold wind. Kind folks would give her a bowl of warm porridge. There weren't many grains of rice in it, but the bowl was always warm to the touch. She'd been walking for over half a year. She set off in spring, and before she knew it, the grass on the mountains had turned dry and brown. Her first pair of shoes wore right through, so she put on a second. Before long, the soles on those split open too. She tied them tight with hemp rope. Dust caked the edges, and the blisters on her feet popped and turned to hard calluses. The mountain paths were the hardest. Rain had washed parts of them away, leaving only a narrow ledge hugging the cliff wall. Right beside it was a deep valley. The wind whipped up from below, blowing open her coat, and her pack pulled back against her. She kept her eyes on her toes, taking one step at a time. When she finally reached flat ground, her palms were slick with cold sweat. The further north she went, the colder it got. The trees were completely bare, and thin ice covered the puddles along the road. Sometimes the wind seeped through her clothes, turning her hands and feet numb. She'd just rub her hands together and press on. Along the way, she met other women. They carried cloth bundles on their backs, looking much the same as she did. Some carried shoes, some brought medicine, and others led children by the hand, all searching for husbands, long silent. They walked together for a stretch. At night, around a small campfire, no one said much about her own past. When they reached a fork in the road, each turned her own way. Their figures scattered into the wind and soon faded from sight. Meng Jiangnu kept heading north. The warm clothes in her bundle remained untouched, tied tight in their knot. One morning, she climbed over a hilltop and finally saw it, the long, dark wall off in the distance. It wound along the mountain ridges like a resting snake, its tail lost in the white fog. She walked down from the hill. With every step closer, the gaps between the stone blocks grew clearer. The stones were massive and the packed earth thick. Soldiers pacing atop the wall were nothing more than tiny shadows. She reached the foot of the wall. The wind swept along the stones, raising dust and blowing the loose hair by her face. She asked everyone along the way, "Have you seen Fan Shiling? He came from the south. He was taken away 2 years ago." She described his age, his height, and what he was wearing. By the end, her voice was lost in the wind. Some shook their heads, and some said they didn't know. Others just looked down and kept lifting heavy stones. An old worker heard the name and stopped. Black dirt was caked under his fingernails. He looked at her for a long time, then at the bundle on her back. His lips twitched a few times before he spoke. Finally, he said softly, "My child, he's already gone. You've come too late." She asked, "Where did he go? If he was moved somewhere else, I can keep looking." The old man put down his stone, his voice even lower. "Dead. Worked to death 2 winters ago." They didn't send his body back home. The foreman had a pit dug and buried him right here under this section of the wall. The old man raised a dry, cracked hand and pointed nearby. His fingers trembled softly in the wind. Meng Jiangnu looked where he was pointing. It was just an ordinary stretch of wall, dull and gray. There were no names on the wall, and no marks either. Just a patch of dead grass in the cracks. She stood right where she was, not moving forward, not stepping back. The wind blew her dress against her legs. That neatly folded winter coat was still in her bundle. Her hand stayed pressed against the cloth knot. After a long time, she finally cried out. The first sob was hoarse, torn right from her chest. It wasn't a quiet cry. She didn't cover her face or care that everyone around was watching. Thousands of miles, hundreds of days and nights, every single stitch under the lamp, it all poured out in that cry. Her voice hit the wall and echoed back through the valley. A sudden flock of birds flew up, filling the sky. The ground under her feet began to shake. Loose stones rolled down the slope and dirt spilled from the wall. Then a section of the wall collapsed. Huge stones crashed into each other, roaring across the distant hills. White dust rose into the air, hiding everyone from view. Workers dropped their tools and scrambled out of the way. When the wind blew the dust away, piles of white bones appeared beneath the fallen wall, lying scattered in the dirt. Every single bone was once a living person. Someone had waited for him at home, keeping his bowl saved at the table. Meng Jiangnu walked into the ruins, searching through pile after pile. Dust settled on her hair and shoulders. Dust settled on her hair and shoulders. She knelt on the ground, clearing away the soil with her bare hands. Her fingernails cracked, blood mixing with the mud. At last, she recognized Fan Shiliang. The silent bones lay beside a tattered scrap of his old clothes. She untied her pack, spread out the warm coat on the ground, and gathered his bones, piece by piece, into the cloth. Word of this soon reached the palace. People said a woman's weeping had brought down a section of the Great Wall. The emperor was furious and ordered her brought before him. Guards filled the entrance outside, scabbards clanking against the stone steps. But when he saw her, the emperor fell silent. There were no tears in her eyes, only a quiet calm behind the dust. The silence was like burnt firewood, cold on the surface, but deep inside, a small red ember still glowed. Legend says the emperor wanted to take her as his concubine. She didn't say no. She only asked for 3 things: a monument for her husband, the emperor himself wearing mourning clothes for a full state funeral, and permission for her to pay her respects in person. The emperor agreed. On the day of the memorial, white banners drifted in the wind, and paper ash covered the stone steps. Dressed in plain white, Lady Mengjiang honored her husband one last time. Then she turned, walked to the shore, and stepped into the waves. The water rolled in wave after wave, pulling the white hem of her dress into the sea. On the shore, nothing was left but wet sand and a few shells. People have been telling this tale for over 2,000 years. History books remember the Great Wall, but rarely the names of the men who built it. Yet, that winter coat that never arrived is still remembered. Its blue cloth unfolds, covering nameless bones. This is Stories Under the Lamp. Next time, we'll light another lamp together. Good night.